Most of us do it hundreds of times a day without giving it a second thought. But the journey that a single bite of food takes is honestly one of the most incredible and underappreciated processes in our entire body. Today, we're going to follow that journey right down the esophagus. So let me ask you, have you ever really stopped to think about it? That simple act of swallowing, well, it's not simple at all. It's actually a beautifully complex, perfectly timed ballet of muscles and nerves, all working in perfect harmony. And get this, we perform this little ballet about 600 times every single day. And the wild part is, most of those swallows are completely subconscious. It's this automatic, absolutely essential function that keeps us going, but it's all happening in the background. Okay, so to really understand this, we need to break it down. See, swallowing isn't just one single event. It's a process with 3 distinct stages. It all starts with the oral phase. That's the part you control. Then it moves to the pharyngeal phase, and finally, it hits the main event for us today, the esophageal phase. This is where our unsung hero really takes over. So let's get to know the pathway our food takes by taking a closer look at the anatomy of the esophagus itself. At its core, the esophagus is like a transport superhighway. It's the critical connection that takes everything we eat from our pharynx, that's the back of your throat, and delivers it safely down to the stomach, where the real heavy-duty digestion begins. And if we zoom in, you can see it's this muscular tube, about 25 centimeters long in most adults. But it's not just one uniform piece either. It's actually divided up into 3 distinct regions. The cervical part up in your neck, the thoracic part running through your chest, and then that short little abdominal section right before it hits the stomach. And if we were to look at a cross-section, you'd see it's so much more than a simple pipe. The esophagus is built with multiple, specialized layers. You've got the inner lining, the mucosa, and then this really powerful outer muscular layer called the muscularis propria. That's the powerhouse. That's what gives it the force to move food along. Now, controlling the entrance and exit to this highway are 2 critical gatekeepers. Right at the very top, you have the upper esophageal sphincter, the UES. And way down at the bottom where it meets the stomach, you've got the lower esophageal sphincter, or LES. Think of these as rings of muscle that stay clamped shut, only opening at the absolute perfect moment to let food pass through. So how does food get from that top gate all the way to the bottom? Well, it doesn't just fall with gravity. In fact, you could swallow while hanging upside down, and it would work just fine. That's because food is actively pushed by this incredible process. It's like muscular magic, called peristalsis. This right here is the real engine of the esophagus. Peristalsis is just this beautifully coordinated series of wave-like muscle contractions. The best way to picture it? Imagine squeezing a tube of toothpaste from the bottom up. The muscle behind the food contracts and squeezes, while the muscle just ahead of it relaxes to make way. And this all depends on a perfect balance of nerve signals, some saying squeeze and others saying relax. And right here, we can actually see that process in action. On the left, a ball of food, which is called a bolus, is moving down. Now, look at the graph on the right. That shows the pressure measurements that go along with it. Each one of those spikes is that muscular wave, a powerful, sequential squeeze that propels the food forward, making sure it gets to the stomach no matter what position your body is in. But what happens when this perfectly tuned system gets disrupted? What happens when the waves are weak or they're uncoordinated or the gates just don't open the way they're supposed to? Well, that's when the journey gets interrupted, and it can lead to some really common and sometimes debilitating disorders. One of the most classic examples is something called achalasia. And this condition is a real double whammy. First, those peristaltic waves just disappear. The body of the esophagus is essentially paralyzed. And second, that lower gate, the LES, it fails to open and relax when you swallow. So the door is locked and there's no force to push anything through anyway. The result is a massive traffic jam. And this X-ray image, which we call an esophagogram, shows it dramatically. Food and liquid get backed up, and it causes the esophagus to stretch out and dilate. You see that classic tapering at the bottom? It's known as the bird's beak sign, and it visually shows that tight, non-relaxing sphincter that's causing the whole blockage. Now, another very common issue involves that exact same lower gate, but for the complete opposite reason. With gastroesophageal reflux disease, or GERD, the problem isn't that the LES stays shut. The problem is that it relaxes and opens up at the wrong times, which allows stomach acid to flow backward, or reflux, right into the esophagus. And that's what causes that familiar, awful burning sensation. Then you have even more complex inflammatory conditions like eosinophilic esophagitis or EOE. This is where a certain type of white blood cell, called an eosinophil, builds up in the esophagus because of allergens, and that causes major inflammation. It's not triggered by just one thing, but it's this convergence of factors: a person's genetics, things in their environment, and their body's specific response to allergens, all coming together to disrupt how the esophagus works. So, all of this really shows us why the esophagus, this quiet and efficient tube, is truly an unsung hero of our digestive system. Its health and its proper function are just absolutely essential. All right, so let's just recap the key takeaways here. First, always remember the esophagus is an active muscular system, not just some passive tube. It's what pushes food to your stomach. Second, that simple swallow is an incredibly complex reflex that we perform perfectly thousands of times a week. Third, those sphincters are the vital gatekeepers that let food in and protect us from what's below. And finally, when this whole system works well, it's fundamental not just to our nutrition, but to our entire quality of life. So the next time you sit down for a meal, maybe you'll pause for just a second after you take that first bite, and maybe you'll listen to the quiet, complex, and incredible story your body is telling you with every single swallow.